On behalf of the Values in Capitalism Project, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's event, The Joy of Capitalism, an Evening with Michael Novak. And in just a few minutes, we'll be hearing from Michael, who is here with us today from Florida, as well as two younger entrepreneurs who are here with us from Washington, D.C. and Chattanooga, respectively. Michael Novak was a scholar at AEI for a total of 32 years before heading down to Florida, longer than some of us in the room have been breathing. And so we are particularly fortunate to have him returning to be with us tonight. I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about AEI's Values in Capitalism project, which I said earlier is hosting tonight's event. Values in Capitalism is an initiative that began 3 years ago here at AEI with an interest in exploring the moral dimensions of free enterprise, particularly with regard to evangelical students throughout the country. On a number of Christian college campuses today, the rise of social justice and other compassionate expressions of biblical faith have become divorced from a thoughtful, biblically rooted, scholarly view of economics that affirms the link between free enterprise, limited government, human freedom, and individual opportunity. Values in Capitalism links together the best of AEI's scholars with local college campuses throughout the country, bringing together reasoned arguments, facts, and the highest standards of research and exposition. We also publish monographs, like the 8 monographs that you see described in the one-page flyer that you have, in addition to hosting a daily blog, which is www.valuesandcapitalism.com. A weekly podcast. I should point out that today's podcast features Mark Stein and, get this, John O'Hurley, the Seinfeld actor who played Mr. Peterman. In addition to a monthly Q&A discussion, tomorrow's Q&A session features Jay Richards of the Discovery Institute and a Twitter feed. In fact, for those of you tuning in tonight via live stream, you can join the conversation on Twitter by following the handle @valuesandcap. You can also tweet questions to @valuesandcap during the Q&A session, and we will look to you, we hope, for the first of those questions. I'd also like to particularly recognize a large class from Bryan College, the 20th Century United States and American Political History class, who is tuning in from Tennessee, as well as a number of other students from campuses throughout the country. Events like tonight's reflect AEI's commitment to raising the enduring foundational questions of our time. A full 3 decades ago, Michael Novak began his magnum opus, The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, by observing, of all the systems of political economy which have shaped our history, none has so revolutionized ordinary expectations of human life, lengthened the lifespan, made the elimination of poverty and famine thinkable, and enlarged the range of human choice as democratic capitalism. Tonight, Dr. Novak will speak more about the essential elements of democratic capitalism, reflecting upon the interconnectedness of democratic freedom, economic freedom, and moral cultural freedom. Following Dr. Novak's address, Katarina Price of Katarina Price Photography and John Sweet of Needlov's Bakery, Needlov's Breadworks, Needlov's Bakery 2.0, will offer some remarks about how our own generation, millennials and Gen Xers, can discover and rediscover these insights of which Michael will be speaking. Finally, I'd like to note that as Governor Romney spoke about earlier this week at the Clinton Global Initiative, inciting the famous heart cry of Tunisia's Mohamed Bouazizi, the 26-year-old street vendor whose response to police harassment helped to ignite the Arab Spring, when he said, "Why are you doing this to me? I am a simple person and I just want to work. I just want to work." Tonight we will hear a good bit more about work and how it connects with promoting dignity, free enterprise, and civil society. Michael Novak, welcome back to AEI.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really delighted, really thrilled to see old friends, and all you young people. It's great and invigorating to see you and to meet you. Let me say I don't entirely approve of the title, The Joy of Capitalism. And I can tell you why. I wrote a book on America's Holy Trinity, baseball, basketball, and football. And I had the $1 million title for it. 3 days before it went to press, the quite dignified, a little bit prissy publisher called me personally on the phone and said, we had to change the title of your book. I said, you're walking away from $1 million. And he hemmed and hawed a little bit. And he said, I said, what's the new title? He said, I'm going to call it The Joy of Sports. I said, oh my God, it's going to be like a book, a cookbook. And anyway, the title I had chosen for it, which I still think was worth $1 million, was Balls. Baseball, basketball, and football. And he was just too embarrassed to do that. He just couldn't bring himself to do that. Okay, so what is capitalism? Let's just start there. When I was here at AEI, I asked my then research assistant to take a look at the dictionaries, check 6, 7, 8, whatever he could find. What do they say capitalism is? And they were unanimous. Webster, Random House, etc. It's the system of private property. You're allowed to keep your profits and exchange by command. The government set the prices, etc. And I said, there are two things wrong with that. Flagrant. That's Karl Marx's definition. And two, it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit reality. And let me go through that. Karl Marx held that capitalism is constituted by private property, private exchange or markets, and private profit. However, this definition was actually an inversion of what he was all about, his dream for socialism, which entailed the abolition of private property, state control of distribution by command, and the appropriation by the state of all profit. Now, as for capitalism, Marx failed to note that all 3 points of his definition belong to virtually every traditional economy through 3 millennia. And it did not at all account for what is novel in the new economic system, which almost all scholars recognize came into existence only during the last 3 centuries, although, of course, there are presentiments of it much earlier. For example, even in biblical times, there was private property, and I apologize to you for reading it, but it's the only way to discipline myself to keep within the time limit. Biblical times had private property. Otherwise, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, would have made no sense. And there were very active markets. Jerusalem during the biblical period was economically nothing but a market. A marketplace on the crossroads between 3 continents where there were neither industries nor verdant agriculture. Third, there were plenty of private properties in the biblical period. The Bible is full of stories about them. And it was from gifts taken out of these profits that the great and beautiful Temple of Solomon was built, one of the wonders of the world. Private property, markets, and profits are marks of traditional economies, not of the new and distinctive economy of capitalism. What is distinctive about capitalism is its central dynamism. And I'm willing to bet when these 2 youngsters talk about their own experiences in small business that they exemplify these. I don't know, but I'm willing to bet. That central dynamism, that vivifying focus, is the act of creative, practical intellect in the virtue of enterprise. we are practically the only people who speak of enterprise as a virtue. And in fact, in many languages of the world, there is not a term for that. There, an enterprise is, as in Italy, an impresa, a business, a place, a building, maybe a going concern, but it's not a virtue. Whereas here in the United States, the word enterprise has been used 10 or more times more frequently than in Britain, and for obvious reasons. When our ancestors came here and landed at Plymouth and elsewhere, there was no Holiday Inn waiting for them. There were no churches or schools or homes. If they wanted those, they had to build them themselves, including the public, the common buildings, the school, the church, the bridge over the creek. They almost all were founded near water, obviously, necessity. And so this country is built by enterprise. If you wanted it, you had to do it yourself. It's the virtue. Enterprise is the virtue of an acting person. An acting person. It's got action at the heart of it. It's not something you sit back and think about. You do. An active person in which, in some languages, well, I said that already, a proper name does not exist. Enterprise is the intellectual habit, an intellectual habit of noticing, discovering, inventing, of seeing before others do new possibilities. What makes capitalism so dynamic is its source in this powerful, innovating habit of mind. Thus, the system is well named for caput, the old noggin, the old head, the old bean, for wit, for inventiveness, for discovery, and for practicality, finding the way through the maze of all the ways in which a business can fail, which are infinite, to the one way in which it's going to succeed, getting everything together. In ancient and medieval times, and all pre-capitalist eras, wealth typically arose from the ownership of great estates, vineyards, orchards, which were the great rewards for government service, for example, to generals of great armies and to Oxford University and Cambridge University. They lived until very recently on these vast estates in many different countries of the world. Thus the great wines and ports of the dining halls of those great universities. During the capitalist era, the cause of wealth shifted from the ownership of lands to ownership of creative insights into new and better products, or into processes for producing or distributing them, or into new services never before provided, or maybe never provided in this location, never provided in this way. You have to have something distinctive to succeed, to stand out from the others. And thus, they're great nourishers of wit. A French writer about 20 years ago commented that, look in your medicine cabinet, look around your house. 90% of the things we use in France were invented in America. And this is what we must begin to imitate and set the government of France on the road, what's longer than 20 years ago, to becoming itself the nourisher of inventions. Well, in brief, the fundamental reality of capitalism is a spiritual reality, fruitful, generative insights. I want to take just a moment to cite a passage from Abraham Lincoln, because of all Americans, I think he saw this most clearly, and he actually, this is where I got the idea. The moral genius of capitalism lies in its institutional support for the inalienable capacity of human beings to use their own wits creatively. Now, Lincoln put it this way: to this genius, it adds the fire of interest. He was speaking of the copyright and patent clause of the U.S. Constitution, which allows to inventors, for a limited time, the right to royalties from their own inventions. This, it turned out, is a magnificent and dynamic way of serving the common good, through stimulating heroic exertions on the part of inventors and discoverers, and costing nobody else anything. I mean, they pay the costs if they fail, and they reap the benefits if they succeed. Here's Abraham Lincoln. Before the patent laws, any man might instantly use what another had invented, so that the inventor had no special advantage from his invention. The patent system changed this, secured to the inventor for a limited time the exclusive use of his invention, and thereby added the fuel of interest to the fire of genius in the discovery and production of new and useful things. Let me just do a little comment. This is not in my original paper, but I can't resist. Here then is the question Lincoln posed. How did the world get from the unlettered, untutored backwoodsman of the almost silent and primeval Garden of Eden to great cities, locomotives, telegraphs, and breakfasts from across the seas? He discerns 6 crucial steps in this grand historical adventure. This will just take a moment. The first step was God-given, the human ability to form a language. The second step, Lincoln says, was the slow mastering of the art of discovery through learning 3 crucial human habits: observation, reflection, experiment. And he gives many primitive examples of the discovery of steam and its power and all that. The third great step was the invention of writing. The fourth great step was the invention of the printing press, because these introduced you to discoveries made long ago that had been forgotten, and to discoveries from far away that you didn't know about. The fifth great step was the discovery of America. In this new country committed to liberty and equality, the human mind was emancipated as never before. Humans did not feel so bound by tradition as their European forebears. They were encouraged to fend for themselves and think for themselves. And when they didn't have nails, because we had no place in America producing nails, they invented a way of fastening things like the wheels of wagons with wooden pegs. And the sixth great step was the adoption of a constitution in which the word right occurs only once, and that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, the recognition of a natural right of authors and inventors to the fruit of their own inventions for a limited time. That's so perspicacious, I think. And he went on to give a number of speeches on that theme at the Wisconsin State Fair in 1858, for example. Okay. What are today, well, when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, for example, personal computers were relatively rare. Cell phones as well. The techniques of biotechnology, genetic medicine, the internet, fiber optics, all these were relatively unknown. And he lowered the capital gains tax rate. By the way, an idea that was born here in this building in AEI, supporting a lonely congressman, without the endorsement of the Chamber of Commerce or the business board of all the major corporations. Pardon? Business Roundtable. Thanks, Jeff. It's hard to ask a question around AEI. I mean, people answer it so quick. So what are, anyway, lowering the capital, I say this because it's so germane to today. Lowering the capital gains tax is not giving money to anybody. The whole secret to it is soaking them for more. You lower the threshold of risk from 30% to 15%, and they're not going to have to give up 30% of their gains. And they're going to do more of it. That's what happened under Reagan. That's how all these new businesses burst into view. All these new industries burst into view. That's what happened under Clinton. Not right away. He was dragged to it by degrees. But when he did the same thing, lowered the capital gains tax rate, he did it not to get less tax from the rich. He doubled what he got from the rich within 3 years. So the difference between tax rate and tax revenue is the key to keep in mind here. And, you know, I can't stand it in this election when people say one candidate unmentioned is going to give more to the rich. Like funny is. He's going to get 2 or 3 times more from the rich than what we're doing now. But anyway, that's based on the record. What are today some of the largest industries in the world did not in 1980 even exist. Immense new fortunes have been made from these new discoveries. It may well be that the still relatively young Bill Gates is the wealthiest man in the world because of his inventions and his patents and copyrights. That is, his ownership in ideas. Transferring wealth, the fundamental meaning from ownership of land to ownership in ideas, open up wealth to poor people. You didn't have to be rich. If you could borrow money from others, you need the capital at low rates. Anybody from any rough-hewn part of America could reap an immense fortune. Experience has shown that even what used to be thought of as such a thoroughly material thing as money, filthy mammon, draws its real value from properties that belong more to the human spirit than to merely material realities. Faith, money is based on faith. Good faith. When people lose confidence in governments and in their currencies, those currencies become relatively valueless. Think of Germany during the Weimar period, when people needed wheelbarrows full of nearly worthless Deutschmarks to buy a loaf of bread. Who would have thought that political faith and confidence were of more weight than solid, grubby money? At many times they have been. And we may be heading there again. Moreover, there's another way in which the introduction of capitalist economies into world history, at first slowly and only in a few places, and by the way, incidentally, as Lord Acton remarked, coincidentally, first in Jewish and Christian countries. In that sort of culture. They're meant for the whole world. Anybody can imitate it once you get them going. And people do. But the birth of the ideas and the birth of the habits that gave human weight to those ideas lay first in those steeped in Jewish and Christian culture for 2,000, 5,000 years. Prior to the introduction of capitalism, it was wisdom to hold that the poor ye shall always have with you. That's what it said in the Bible even. The existence of the poor, indeed of large masses of the poor, truly large majorities of poor people, had not yet been taken as immoral, merely as a fact of life. Such poverty was virtually universal and widely and commonly commented on as unavoidable. You couldn't do anything about it. No one thought to alter that situation. No one even took it as a scandal until, as Hannah Arendt notes it in her wonderful little book on revolution, Europeans began to take note of the new experiment in North America, in which hundreds of thousands of formerly poor people were within a generation or two living in comfortable homes of their own, enjoying a prosperity unprecedented in Europe, on a new continent in which a virtually universal emergence from poverty was taken for granted. Thomas Jefferson commented when he was in France as U.S. ambassador that even the slaves in America, and well he should know, lived at a higher level of prosperity than the majority of people in France. They were indeed les misérables, as one of their great writers put it. This utterly and astonishing and novel possibility shocked the conscience of Europe and created, Arendt argues, das Sozialproblem, the crisis of conscience out of which grew socialism, communism, and other movements of vast social reform. It was Adam Smith who in 1776 asked the most important of revolutionary questions, not, if I may point out, what is the cause of poverty, which blazes across Newsweek magazine every 20 years or so and other magazines. What are the causes of poverty? It's the wrong question. As you can see, if you begin to imagine what it would be like to discover the action. I mean, the answer, suppose you discovered the cause of poverty. Marvelous. Now you can create more poverty. Rather, Adam Smith asked a question overlooked by Descartes, Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, and all the other great thinkers before him. What is the nature and the cause of the wealth of nations? Nobody had asked that question before. And please note, it was the wealth of nations he was interested in, not individuals. This is not a search for selfishness or the lone individual. It's a search for nations, and in all nations. Adam Smith was looking for a social theory. He was prescribing a set of social reforms of universal application. Contrary to socialist polemic, the Anglo-Saxons are not merely individualists, but steadfast in a powerful social and communitarian outlook. They even queue up to get on a bus. If you want to see radical individualism, get on a bus in Italy. It's everyone for himself or herself. And it's one of the great sensual experiences on earth. There'll not be a part of your body that goes untouched. Adam Smith was the first man in history to conceive of a world from which poverty will be banished, a world of universal affluence, his phrase, a world in which every woman, man, and child will be liberated from the prison of poverty. That was his goal. That is capitalism's goal. That is the chief source of capitalism's morality. No one else had ever dreamed of such a vision, and in a practical, institutional, highly intelligent and creative way, with a small arsenal of institutions and practices and methods to recommend for action. The task of bringing the whole world from underdevelopment to development began with Adam Smith. The great task of removing the burden of poverty from every single woman and man among the poor. That has been from that day till this the universal mission of capitalism. And it is still being carried out today. Consider this. Very few in the entire Western world have noted the great economic miracle that has taken place on the mainland of Asia since 1980. Between them, the giant economies of China and India. And do you remember, well, some of you are so young you won't remember, but when we were young, back before the Civil War or whenever it was, my colleague at Stanford, where I was teaching, Paul Ehrlich, was publishing a book every other year on new ways in which the world was going to end badly. One of them was the population bomb. The image was we were all going to be up to our elbows in those pattering herds of thundering feet. And another book was about starvation, famine in India in 1984. He was writing that in the 60s. Well, 1984 came. And by then, India was now exporting food, not dying of starvation. And by the efforts of an American discoverer of miracle rice and miracle grains, Norman Borlaug from the grand state of Minnesota. No, from Iowa, excuse me. Gosh, that was a mistake. Iowa. And a good friend of my wife's. Even Bangladesh, after World War II, if I remember my figures right, my brother Jim was sort of the Tocqueville of Bangladesh and wrote a marvelous book about the land of many waters and of the sun. And if I remember his figures correctly, after World War II, Bangladesh was about 33 million people. And it was deemed to be an exceedingly poor country. And today it's over 100 million. Now, you can call that the population explosion if you want. But it's not because people in Bangladesh are having more children. They're not. They're having fewer. But they're living. Most used to die by the age of 2 or 3. Even in the United States, it was the same in the year 1900. Not most, but a very high percentage. And now they're living. And it's not a bad thing if they're in your family and they're still living. It's a very good thing. But they're not starving the people of Bangladesh. They are exporting food. And a whole food processing industry has grown up that wasn't there before. Well, I could say a lot more, but between them, the point is the giant economies of China and India have turned toward capitalist economic methods, releasing the dynamism of individual enterprise, initiative, and creativity among peasants and city dwellers alike. And in that process, just in 20 years, formerly communist socialist China and India have raised more than 1/2 billion persons out of poverty. Never have so many people emerged from dire poverty in so short a time in one geographical location, and in this case, a vast one. As AEI's Jagdish Bhagwati has shown in his brilliant text, In Defense of Globalization, the enormous creative potential of global capitalism can best be seen by comparing the directories of Asia and Africa over the last quarter century. In 1970, 76% of the world's poor were in Asia, while only 11% were in Africa. In 1998, China and India had lifted so many people out of poverty that those percentages had nearly been reversed. Asia now has 15% of the world's poor, not 76. While Africa is home to 66%. In the relatively brief period of 3 decades, China and India have lifted 1/2 billion persons out of poverty. This is a great work of social justice, lifting 500 million people out of poverty. One lesson it teaches us is that new job-creating businesses, primarily small businesses, of all the businesses created under Ronald Reagan, 16 million, I believe, between 80 and 90% were in small businesses, employing under, if I recall correctly, 25 persons or fewer. It's that way in Italy, which produces 2 or 3 times more enterprises than all the northern countries of Europe. And it continued under Bill Clinton, to make the point nonpartisan. Under Bill Clinton, 22 million new jobs were created. It was a spectacular display of creativity in America in the period from 1980 through the 1990s. Now, under Bill Clinton, who knew so many would be special prosecutors? But hey, 20 million new jobs is a... One lesson this great work of social justice teaches us is that new job-creating businesses, primarily small businesses, are the key strategic institutions in the struggle for social justice in the world today. Job-creating businesses are the best and only hope of the poor. And in Latin America, we need something like 20 million, 15 million new small enterprises to soak up the more than 100 million people over the age of 15 who are either unemployed or underemployed. And those people are the entrepreneurs. They meet you from the time you get off the airplane as you walk through every city trying to sell you this or that. Small businesses and large are also the best hope, not only of the poor, but of civil society. They alone generate the private funds available to voluntary associations that serve the needs of the poor and of the sick and everybody else. It's private associations that built AEI and cancer clinics and universities. Do you know that in the year 1872, there were more colleges and universities in the state of Ohio than in all of Britain and all of France put together? And almost all of them were created by the churches and villages of Ohio because people understood Lincoln's point that the cause of the wealth of nations is intellect. And they wanted it close to home. And they built them with bake sales and quilt sales, and they didn't turn to government to do it. They understood the cause of the wealth of nations. So it's the success of businesses, and the Midwest was nothing but small businesses making pioneer towns take root and succeed and perdure through generations. And it's only new businesses that create the funds that allow us to do things beyond the reach of government. The government doesn't have to do it. That's what keeps us free. Okay, small businesses and large, and I'm almost at the end here. I'll be all right. Are also the best hope of democracy. If all that people get from democracy is the chance to vote every 1 or 2 years, while no improvements occur in the family income situation, they will not love democracy. We saw this happen in Central Europe after the wall came down. It was a very touch and go. But in Poland, in the first 6 months, 500 million new small businesses were formed. And in the next 5 years more, can't be million, I've got to be mistaken there, but 500,000 is what I meant to say. And by the end of the year, 1 million. I mean, people drove to Germany, the wall being down, and filled up the trunk of their car in the back seat with oranges and toilet paper and everything else, and drove back and sold it, drove back again. And restaurants started springing up. I teach at a summer institute in Poland. I did for many years. And we just watched it happen all around us in Krakow. Every time we came back, new businesses were open. New buildings were painted. Electricians were needed to put in new wire, which of course had not happened under the Nazis or the communists for 50 years. And new plaster and new plumbing and all that. Anyway, I don't have to go on. But it wasn't clear that that would happen. What if the government passes legislation saying their free markets can operate? And what if they say you can keep your profits? And what if they say you can even have checking accounts in the bank or savings accounts? And what if they say you can start small businesses cheaply without paying too much, don't having to pay bribes and so forth? Well, unfortunately, in Central Europe, they still pay those. And then nobody did anything. They sat down as they did under socialism and waited for the government to do something. Nothing would have happened. Capitalism doesn't occur with laws. There have to be good laws. But it occurs when people show enterprise, when they get up off their rear end, look around for things to do, and start doing them. And by the way, I'm all in favor of bakeries. We got a new bakery in Long Island where we're living in a little town with wonderful cheesecake and fresh bread every morning. And I came home from the little general store where they opened up, and I said to my wife, our level of living is just jumped by 10% or 20%. It just, oh, it was so wonderful. Anyway, so good luck. Finally, capitalism instills in tradition-bound populations a new, and in some respects, a higher personal morality. What they discovered in Poland is it's not enough to have a democracy. You have to have improvement in the family's condition, economic condition. And if you're going to have that, you need people to look around and see what needs to be done and take responsibility for doing it. So show initiative and take the risk of spending what little you have to try to make it grow. And when people show that virtue, it's different from under communism. Some people preferred communism. Even today, some prefer communism. Because they feed you, they supply you a house, they give you medical care such as it is. In other words, they treat you like cows to be kept. But you don't have to share responsibility, or you dare not. And now to survive, you do. And it's harder for people, but it's quite satisfying. As Arthur Brooks said, the two greatest sources of happiness in human life are achievement, building something yourself, having achieved something. Very few things make you happier than that. And the only thing that does is, as Herb Stein, our wonderful crotchety old economist, used to say, he discovered it near the end of his life, the golden moments is when you help other people. Herb had a heart attack, and he had to walk a certain amount of days, so he took a bus part way back to the Watergate. He was 80-something, and he one day noticed that a lady trying to get out of the bus was blind, or almost so, and he gave her his arm, and he took her down, and then he took her to up on the sidewalk, and then he realized he was uncertain, so he asked her where she needed to go, and he just felt so great. And you know, he wrote this beautiful little essay about the golden moments of life, or when you help other people. Those two things, achievement and giving. Okay. What people love best about democracy is the economic opportunity and prosperity that a free economy brings them. It is democratic capitalism they love, not merely democracy. Let me say one word. These are contrary principles in a way, capitalism and democracy. They're two independent systems that run by independent rules, but they are necessary to each other. You can't have a democracy succeed which isn't capitalist, at least in good measure. As in Sweden, they call it a socialist country, but they have free newspapers and lots of invention and thriving enterprises. It's just that those who build them have to go to live elsewhere or else pay 90% tax on everything. But there's still, as long as there's that little bit of a free economy, you can make democracy succeed. When the government knows everything, you can't. Okay. Capitalism insists upon the rule of law and the strict observance of contracts. It teaches hard work, inventiveness, initiative, and a spirit of responsibility. If something needs to be done, get up and do it. Nobody else is going to do it. It teaches patience with small gains, incremental but steady and insistent progress. During the 19th century, Great Britain achieved an average of 1.5% of GDP growth every year, with a happy result that the average income of the ordinary laborer in Britain quadrupled in a single century. The moral habits of invention, discovery, hard work, persistence, saving, investment, and moral seriousness brought about the single greatest transformation in the condition of the poor in all time. The greatest advances in hygiene, medicine, longevity, and physical well-being in all recorded history. Capitalism brings in its train immense transformation, and the root of this transformation is moral. Those peoples and nations that neglect the moral ecology of their own cultures will not enjoy the fruits of such transformation, or having tasted them, will fall into rapid decline. Capitalism is a morally exigent system. It must be moral, or it will falter, decline, and fail. It must be moral, or it will not be at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So we've heard that job-creating businesses are the essential hope for the poor, and we want to hear now from two panelists who have started businesses. First, Katarina Price, and then John Sweet. Katarina, in keeping with her passions for photography and people and storytelling, launched out on her own about a year ago after 12 years of work with the Discovery Communications Incorporated company and National Geographic to try something new. So we'd like to hear from you first. Second, we'll hear from John Sweet, a baker and an entrepreneur who was Tennessee's Small Business Person of the Year in 2010 and the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce's Small Businessman of the Year in 2009. He runs Need Loves, which is an independent, family-owned and operated bakery in the Chattanooga area that serves a number of restaurants and customers. So over to you, and then we will throw it over to you for a conversation. Katarina.
I think it's on now. A little bit about my story of how I launched my business. As Josh said, I have a background in documentary filmmaking, or film industry rather. It was actually in college. I went to Penn State University. I was a business major there. And I always just had a knack for business and enjoying that. But I also knew that I wanted to merge business and creativity together. So it was in college where I found that passion. I remember the class that I was sitting in when I kind of, that light bulb moment happened. So during college, I had some internships, whether that be at art galleries or actually at Discovery Channel where I worked in documentary film, and knew that I had a passion for culture and people and storytelling and exploring the world, all that kind of thing. So out of college, I had a great career. A few years at Discovery Channel was my first job, very exciting, and went over to National Geographic Channel and was there for about 10 years, and had a great experience there, had different roles and positions there, and got to see different parts of the world and meet a lot of interesting filmmakers and be part of the storytelling and making process, which was quite exciting. And then about a year ago, there was a restructure. And in this economy, I'm sure a lot of us know someone or have been through something like that. And it happened quite quickly. And there was a restructure, and I was told that my position was going in a different direction. So suddenly I was out of a job. And for someone like me and my personality and my career path, you know, it's very steady Eddie, and the next thing, and the next thing, and, you know, overnight it was gone. And so in that situation, you know, I took some time off to, as Mr. Novak talked about, to observe, reflect, and experiment. And you know, did a lot of soul searching in that time. You know, talked to a lot of people, talked to my closest friends and family, and asked them what they saw in me and the skill sets and things like that. Also looked at the market needs, and also where my passions and my skill set needs, you know, match what needs are out in the marketplace. So I was doing my photography, and I've always had a passion for photography. I've always been a hobbyist. And And then, I was also doing the job search. So I was doing both. I was stirring two pots. I was doing the photography, and I was also doing the job search. Well, in this economic climate, it was kind of a rude awakening in terms of the lack of jobs that were out there, the competition to find the certain jobs that were of interest, things like that. So it was actually with my photography businesses where I found just grace and favor is the best way to explain it. I felt, people were coming to me and asking me, I would love for you to shoot this or that, or how much do you charge? And it started turning into a business. So it's something that I always wanted to do, but it was something that it was moving forward, where when I was looking for the job search and things like that, I felt like I was hitting my head against a wall. And so basically, I started taking on more and more gigs. I wasn't full-time yet, but it started growing, and by referrals and things like that, it kept growing. And actually, Josh asked me to just kind of share some photos here of my work as I talk. So basically, from there, that started growing, and as Mr. Novak talked about, it's been really rewarding in terms of creating something with your own hands, coming up with your own ideas, going after it. Being a small business owner, it is all up to you. And that's thrilling in many ways, and it's frightening in other ways. But to make something happen and to create something with your own hands that the marketplace responds to has been really, really rewarding. And especially for the market needs, what was being talked about, especially in a social media age, and wanting to help other entrepreneurs to get their visual content, whether it's a good headshot or content for their websites, or being a part of someone's story, whether it's shooting their wedding or shooting their family portrait, things like that. It's been really rewarding to be part of people's stories, being invited in to asked to bring my own creativity to their story, which has been really rewarding. So I think my encouragement to people who have found themselves in those situations, whether they're just wanting to go out on their own or they find themselves in a sudden job loss or things like that, to really take stock and inventory of your skill sets and of your experience and ways that you can be taking initiative and giving back and going after things in the marketplace to solve problems and to meet needs. That's how I look at my business. What problems can I help solve, and what needs can I meet? Business kind of gets a bad rap about profit, and for me, it's so much more of the bigger story of helping people, like I said, of telling people's stories, yeah. So that's a bit of my story. Yeah.
You can leave that running if it's not done. I'm sure it'll only enhance my story, I'm sure. My name's John Sweet, and from Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I started Needloff Spreadworks with the help of my wife 10 years ago. We're going to have our 10-year anniversary in 6 days. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I thought that I might like to be a bread maker, and when I was in college got a job in a bakery, and it turned out that I just fell in love with the process. A little bit earlier than that, I was an exchange student in high school in Germany, and I think, sort of looking back, that that's maybe where the seeds were planted, where I experienced a food culture that was different from the food culture I grew up in. So it's more buying bread from the bakery every day, buying eggs from a farmer, buying meat from a butcher, and so forth. And there was something, I think, that kind of stuck with me about that. I had several jobs through high school that were normal grocery store, fast food, movie theater type jobs, a painting company where I ended up getting put into small leadership roles, which made me think going into college that business may be a good area for me, maybe management. And it was during, I had a really miserable job after my freshman year at Covenant, and decided that summer that I really wanted to work in a bakery. I had a job where I had to ride my bike past a donut shop every morning. I had to go to my miserable job and smell the awesome job halfway there. It was grueling. And so I decided that the next summer I really wanted to work in a bakery. I ended up going to Ann Arbor, Michigan, back to close to where I'm from, and got a job at Zingerman's Bakehouse, where I stood at on a concrete floor at a big, thick wooden workbench, hand shaping about 1,000 loaves of bread every day, and I just fell in love with bread making. And from there, really kind of decided that you know, taking these business things and this developing passion for bread making, that maybe it would make sense to think about owning and operating a bakery someday. So it was probably in 1998 that I got serious about kind of being on that path. I had several other bakery jobs while I was in college. I graduated from Covenant in 2000, went on to the American Institute of Baking to get to take their baking science and technology course, which was a 16-week, 40-hour-a-week, pretty intensive course to get some significant technical training about the process. Ended up going back to Zingerman's to be a manager. Got to really sort of learn their system, a system that works really well. They're an incredible business, an incredible bakery, and just a great place to work and learn. And in April of 2002, went back to Chattanooga specifically to start Needloff Spreadworks, and it took about 6 months to get going. And on October 3rd of 2002, we were open for business, had our first sale. We started out just as wholesale to restaurants and grocery stores, and then about 3 years in, we ended up buying a property. It took us a really long time to get all of our financing put together. We eventually renovated the property, opened a bakery cafe to complement our wholesale business, and now we did $1 million in sales last year for the first time. We've grown every year since the beginning, and we have about 20 employees. And it affords me the opportunity to leave for 24 hours here and there. So we've turned it into kind of a lifestyle business for us. My wife is more geared toward an urban lifestyle, and so the property that we bought, we were able to renovate the building next door, and now we live there with our 2 children. And our school is 2 blocks away, so we are able to walk the kids to school every morning. The one missing piece is a grocery store, which they happen to be building down the street right now. So we get to live sort of a full life there around the bakery. And just one thing that sometimes in my daily life I sort of forget, but we just had our website redone and had some local videographers do a little video for us, and it's a really great video, and it's at needloffs.com if anyone wants to check it out. But it reminded me of the reasons why I really love bread making, and there are physical components to bread making, standing at that workbench and shaping the bread. It's hot in a bakery if you've ever been back in the production area, so you get sweaty, you're tired at the end of the day, you're on your feet all day long, and so there's a physical component that I really love. The emotional aspects of bread making are very satisfying to me, that at the end of the day you get to see your work on the rack or on the shelf. It's nourishing food that people are willing to pay money for and feed to their families. And then there are these spiritual components to bread making. I feel like the bread making process really parallels kind of our life process in a lot of ways, from the creative elements, the baker as the creator, mixing these ingredients together, particularly with sourdough, with true sourdough that is naturally leavened, so microorganisms, wild yeasts and bacteria from the air that turn this flour and water mixture into this living thing that grows, and then as it goes on through the process, shaping with the hands, hand shaping, and then putting the cuts, the artistic designs in it, and then where it reaches the oven and literally is transformed from dough to bread through this transformation by fire to becoming the thing that it was intended to become from the beginning, is just a beautiful process to me, and that I still, although I don't engage in the actual bread making so much anymore, although I do have to be there at 2:30 on Saturday morning this week to be the mixer, I still have a great love for the process of bread making, and feel very blessed to have been able to leverage that and find our way through the treacheries of the business world to make it to where we are now.
Well, I just have to say quickly, I was entranced listening to Michael Novak, but then when John started describing the sourdough, you know, it's hard to compare the two. And of course, Katarina's images speak for themselves. So over to you now. We have 2 microphones floating here in the room. I know we have at least one question that's come in via Twitter, which we'll get to in a minute. So if you do have a question, please don't be bashful. Raise your hand. We have one right here. Ethan. AEI rules, right? So state your protest statement in the form of a question.
Okay, my name is Sharon Bovat. Real quick, I'm a voice of a moderate. Do either of you, did you need federal funding or state funding to start your businesses, or were you able to start them on your own?
I was able to start mine. You got to do my flipping on your mics.
I was able to start mine on my own.
I had saved up $12,000 to start my business, spent $2,000 of it during the time trying to start it, spent $10,000 on an oven, and thankfully had a landlord that was willing to loan me the money and split the renovation costs of the building. So didn't get any program money, but had a landlord, our first landlord, who was very willing to work with us, and couldn't have done it without him.
I know, Sterling, there's a question from a student in Dr. Ricker's class, or maybe it's the professor himself, I'm not sure.
This question is for Mr. Novak. The professor writes for the class. A few years ago, you wrote about socialism, and you said, "Few doubt the quite predictable outcomes of socialism." So the question is, why do you think that, especially with Europe plunging down the tubes after their experiment with democratic socialism, why are so Americans so willing to go down the same path, and why do so many doubt those predictable economic outcomes?
My father told me when I was very young, never argue politics or religion, because nobody changes their mind and it gets very emotional and you get nowhere. I slowly figured there's got to be a career in that. And the other good part about the career I didn't realize is that in the first is you have to make the same arguments over and over again. Because people say they want freedom, but they don't really. They don't really. Dostoevsky said, people cry, freedom, freedom, give them freedom. 15 minutes they want handed back. You can tell that in the classroom. People want to be free to pursue their own ideas, and then they come to you and they know what exactly should be in the term paper, and so on. So it's really discouraging to me that you just have to keep repeating the same arguments, and that the trend of human life is somehow away from freedom, away from responsibility, away from risk. And it's a siren call. In addition to which, the founders of our country made a study of republics in every era. John Adams and Jefferson and Franklin overseas ransacked libraries to read about the history of republics. And they discovered that the thing that killed republics most, the greatest of vices, isn't hatred, which is quite visible and its results are quite terrible. The great destructive, corrosive force in human life is envy. The envy of one class for another class, or one sector of the city, as in Siena, for another. The envy of the poor for the rich. There's one line about this, I've always loved it. I'll leave out the first part because it's a little bit longer, but the pure happiness for this ethnicity and that, the pure happiness of a Russian is to see his neighbor's barn burn down. If there's no place to advance, you just want to tear down others. In a growing economy, that dissipates, because now you concentrate on your pursuit of happiness and what you want to do. And you don't worry about your brothers and sisters. Let them do what they want to do. Let them make more money if they want to. But this is what I want to do. And you don't envy the others. You concentrate on your own and there's opportunity and support, and the environment is right. And okay. So I just think a kind of dependency on government is a natural human condition. And the outburst of liberty is rare and will only last as long as there's a culture of risk and responsibility. What constitutes a neoconservative, I hated that term, but I finally decided it's not worth fighting. What constitutes a neoconservative is to recognize more than liberals and others the crucial importance of economics to democratic development. But more important still is having the rules right and the rule of law and recourse to justice system. So more important even than economics, which is crucial, is politics. And then more important than both of them together is the culture. If you don't have people who are virtuous and love virtue and try to make the most of their human spirits that they can, a republic like ours can't endure. And so the most and deepest, so culture is really hard, and the culture of responsibility and work and discipline is really hard to maintain. The fathers maintain it. The sons grow to resent it, and the grandsons are tired of hearing about it, and they turn to poetry or something, pot, whatever. So it's what Lincoln describes as the, what does he call it? The silent artillery of time. You know, ethics takes place over 3 generations. It's not just the individual, and you go into decline so quickly, and I think that's where we are. Anyway.
Questions? Let's go here and then Samantha. We have time for 2 more questions, so maybe state your questions briefly.
Michael, I have really not question. One thing, your name of the book is Democratic Capitalism. Today you finish as best, Democratic Capitalism is the best. I agree with your speech, but one thing, democratic capitalism, that means another capitalism is autocratic capitalism. Capitalism means a autocratic economic system, and democratic economic system is another thing where you get freedom and equal right. Without equal right, no freedom can exist. If you give only freedom, after few times it goes out. But when you mix 2, freedom and equal right, then it continues. And this is democratic system. Man's life has 4 dimensions: political, social, economic, cultural. So democracy is everywhere. You try to assimilate this, but I want to say every system has its own institution. Democracy has its own institution, economic institution. I will not discuss. My question is, you ever think about this? I have some papers. I have no time. I'll go back.
Although,
So
let me just say quickly,
read
just make it
paper.
one quick question if you can.
The question is, do you ever think democracy and democratic economy and democratic or capitalistic economy is opposite thing?
Yeah, that's important, because one other thing that this country was founded on more than any other, I think, is a profound sense of sin, if I may put it that way. We know that every person sometimes sins, sometimes does what he knows he shouldn't do, or doesn't do what she knows she should do. And therefore you have to have a system of checks and balances. So our three systems, economic, political, and cultural, are at odds with one another. And the leaders of each of these systems does not like the other two or understand the way they think. Then that's the only way to make it work. If all three of these systems are healthy, they check each other. If one of them surrenders and yields, it weakens the whole. Adam Smith was the inventor of the idea of political economy. In Aristotle and Aquinas, and from the beginning and on through history, there was talk of politics. Nobody even understood there was such a thing as economics in anything like what we mean today. And Smith turned the attention to people that you need to worry about the political institutions if you want a free economy. And, okay, I don't want to go on, but democratic capitalism, a political system and an economic system. And they do feed one another, but they correct one another. Politicians can be profligate, but then they create debts, and reality catches up to them. Now, all this tension is summarized on the motto on U.S. currency. It says, "In God we trust." Now, you don't have to believe in God, but the operational meaning is in nobody else. For everybody else, there are checks and balances. So that's a brief reply to you.
Wonderful. I think that with that, seeing the clock, I would like to invite all of us to a wine and cheese reception just behind me here in the foyer. Thanks again so very much to Katerina, to John, to Michael Novak for a foundational conversation tonight. We look forward to hopefully seeing you in 3 months' time. Thank you again for coming, and good night.